Hello and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Katja Strachman and I'm a manager of the Employer Relations team, and I will be moderating today's panel discussion. Please note all participants are muted. However, please feel free to write in your questions in the questions panel on your right, and we will be happy to respond. Also, please feel free to participate in the discussion and share your own advice. We will do our best to read your advice live for the audience to hear. I am pleased to introduce today's panelists. Lauren Becker is the Director of Professional Development at Crowe Soberman. She manages CPA student recruitment, oversees all staff training and professional development, and leads the firm's internal common final examination program. With over 13 years of accounting experience, Lauren's background includes working at both international and mid-sized accounting firms. She has extensive experience in training and development, performance management, recruitment, private mid-market audit methodology, tools and templates, as well as audit and accounting standards. Justin Hung is an accounting professional working in the financial services industry for over 10 years. Justin has worked for major financial institutions, including RBC Dominion Securities, TD Bank, Macquarie Private Wealth, and HSBC Bank Canada. Justin has extensive experience in financial reporting, forecasting and planning, and providing value-added analysis and commentary to both internal and external stakeholders. Janelle Simpson is an officer within the Employer Relations team at CPA Ontario. Prior to joining CPA Ontario, she was a manager at PricewaterhouseCoopers within the Technology, Communications, and Entertainment Group. As part of her role, Janelle was a mentor and has firsthand experience of the challenges mentors face. Welcome, panel.
Hello.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
The webinar has been split into 4 categories, which will help guide the discussion. The first category addresses mentoring a student who works in a different organization or industry. Here are some questions from our audience. The first question we received is, how do I determine the accuracy of their technical competencies when I have no experience in the same field?
So yeah,
Janelle?
Sure. Yeah. So this is, I guess, a common misconception, between mentors and mentees and kind of not understanding the role in the relationship. So as a mentor, you're not required to approve or sign off on any of the technical competencies. So the primary role, and we'll talk about this a little bit more as we go, but you're expected to provide guidance and support in terms of how a student will develop and progress throughout their career. So discussing challenges, goals, pain points, and especially in terms of providing support on the enabling competencies. So, if there is that miscommunication with your mentee, you are not required to sign off on any technical competencies. The only people who can do that are myself and the other officers when we review the students' reports.
I would love to add, though, that also from, just discussions with the student, you do get a clear picture of sort of where they are at and if it seems reasonable. So, when you're listening to them and they're telling you what they're working on and things that they're experiencing, listen for keywords. So, like a level 0 to 2 is really all about like retrieval and comprehension. So are they talking about recording things and calculating? Whereas a 1 to 2 is about new insights and applying what you've learned to a new situation. So are they now analyzing? Are they identifying? Are they researching? And finally, a level 2 is, okay, now you're really able to utilize all the skills that you've learned and apply your knowledge and make recommendations. So are they now evaluating and reviewing and advising? So even though you don't really have background in the role that they're doing, I still think that you're able to assess if it seems reasonable how they're assessing themselves.
And I think a really important part of that, and we've kind of noticed a disconnect with some of the other mentors, is some mentors not understanding. So, like, for example, you understand the difference between a 0, 1, and a 2. I think that's super critical, especially in the mentor-mentee relationship, to at least have, you're not supposed to be an expert at the competency map, but at least have a general understanding so you can guide those discussions. So while you're not signing off on it, if a student comes in their first 6-month report and says, hey, I have level 2s in all 20 areas, as a mentor, you can provide, the context to say, hey, maybe that's not reasonable. Can we think about refocusing? So definitely a good point.
Yeah, and just to add on to the great point that we already discussed, I do remind my mentee that they should submit their reports in a timely manner, because a lot of time that the mentees will just, I just keep working, but I, talk to them, have you, seems like I've done something new. When the last time you submitted your assessment or report, and say, so, they didn't really remember to do that. So submitting the report in a timely and complete manner is also something very important.
And I'd also add that just as a mentor, if you're not sure what the different levels are, you're still fairly new to this, the rubric is really helpful. So, when you're actually logged into PERT, there's that little blue circle with the question mark, in this section with technical or enabling skills. If you click on that, it does go through exactly what is expected at each level. So that's a really great document to refer to when your mentee's telling you about all their experiences.
Warms my heart that you mentioned the blue information icon. Definitely, definitely a really good tool. So.
And that's a fantastic lead into the next question, which is, do I have to explain enabling competencies to my mentee?
So it isn't really our job to explain these concepts to them. And there are so many amazing resources that you can suggest to them if they're not clear on them. So there's, fact sheets and the rubric, like I mentioned. There's enabling skills videos, and these are all on, CPA Ontario's website as well as CPA Canada. They both have amazing resources. But really, the mentor should be spending more time talking about how they're applying these skills and having those meaningful conversations.
I agree to that, but as a mentor for myself, at least personally, I think they should have just a general understanding of the enabling competency. Sometimes, there's some high-level general question that the mentee will ask, and I think having those answered in the back pocket will be very helpful. But I agree, like what we have discussed so far, the CPA Ontario website has a lot of useful information that the mentor can refer to for information. And if there's any specific questions that the mentee is asking that I don't know about, I will personally ask them to, please contact CPA Ontario for guidance.
And I do want to add as well that if you find that your mentee isn't necessarily prepared for your meetings with them and they're coming with questions like, what are the enabling competencies, then I would just let them know what you expect to prepare for the next meeting. So, you want to ensure that the experience report is complete, and perhaps it's a good idea for them to provide a list of questions in advance on topics that they might want to discuss or questions they had.
That's a great point. The next question we got was, if I feel that my student isn't gaining relevant experience in the particular sub-competency area to meet the requirements, what support can I offer?
So for me personally, I will first take a look at the last review that was done and see if there's any particular area that is missing or need work on that is obvious. And after that, I would try to develop a plan together with my mentees that they can execute to try to gain those areas that need further work on. Like, for example, I will tell them, maybe you can work with your manager to see if there's certain project or additional tasks you can take on to help you further develop the skill that is currently not up to the standard that's required.
I would just like to add that especially these questions are surrounding the EVR students, and EVR students don't need to follow predefined competency maps. So take a look at the consolidated summary, which is a really helpful tool to see.
I'm just saying my heart. This is all great things.
Take a look at the consolidated summary to see exactly what they need, and that tool is a great tool just to see the core depth and breadth requirements, and it tells you exactly what's met and not met. So take a look there, because there might be an alternative. So, even though they think they need to gain experience in a certain competency area, there might be another one that is an option for them. So take a look there. And also, if necessary, perhaps it would be a great opportunity to coach the student to help them have that conversation with their manager and help them determine if there are other areas that they can get experience in.
Yeah, and I think just to add on to it, a lot of times students you can kind of call it like they're stuck in the weeds. They have a hard time looking at the bigger picture to say, okay, this is where I'm at in my development, versus where I need to be. So definitely as a mentor, kind of echoing off of what Lauren said, like having that bigger picture to say, okay, this is where you need to be. Maybe if you're not here, you know, a lot of students do have issues talking with their managers to say, hey, I do need exposure to this area. How can I, you know, attain this? And that's, you know, a great way to, you know, maybe develop an enabling competency and communication to help coach them through approaching and asking for, you know, work that might be a little bit more advanced, but could help them, you know, meet one of the technical competency requirements. So definitely taking a look at like the bigger picture, and the consult tool is a good idea.
Thank you. I think we covered this in the very first question, but do I have to approve their experience report?
Yeah, so very high level. No, you do not. Definitely want to provide, you know, conversations around the progress and how a student is progressing, but as it stands, only CPA Ontario will approve the experience reports, but you're there to, you know, provide conversation around how a student's progressing and any challenges that they're having.
Great. How much detail do I need to record in PERT following my meeting with the student? Is there something in particular the profession is looking for?
So it doesn't need to be too lengthy, but you definitely need to have depth. I would definitely put in an overview of what you discussed with your mentee, and you need to think about questions like, are they on track? Are they excelling in a certain area? What are their goals in the next 6 months? And are there any concerns with their development or anything that CPA would want to know?
Yeah, I will just to add on to those great points, I also will document what was discussed last time and then since our last meeting, and then what has been done to address those items that we discussed to see, you know, has the mentee, you know, take any action to address the shortcoming or on the action item that needs to be done. If not, you know, if there's something else what we need to do to ensure those the issue that we'll discuss is being addressed.
So I have my own question just from what you guys were saying that just came to my mind, because I think you're making a fantastic point, you know, talking about what it is that your plan was and making sure that the plan was met in the next meeting. Do you use the planning documents that are provided from CPA in order to start your relationship with your mentee by setting a plan, by creating a mentorship agreement?
I personally do not. We start more informally, but I do think that they are a great resource. I think also my experience is within pre-approved programs, so I pretty much already know my mentees and the relationship is already like informally there, but I definitely think this would be helpful in the EVR situation.
I do reference the document, but I don't think we actually, you know, have anything signed and dated and and put it on record. But it's more about right at the first meeting, you know, establish a clear understanding of what is expected from both sides. I think that's very important, and then know that, you know, there will be a game plan that both of us will be working towards together, because ultimately I want to help you to be successful.
Great, thank you. I didn't record my meeting with the student in PERT. Are there repercussions?
So maybe to jump on this. So there is a penalty if a student has a missed mentor review. And when we say missed in PERT, is that it has to be completed within the PERT tool for it to count. So the student will submit the mentor request, you'll document it, fill it out, and submit as completed. There is a 1-month duration penalty for any missed review. So they're required to have 2 for every 12 months of current experience. If you've missed it, you know, what definitely helps is still get that meeting in there and recorded, even if it might not be the most timely. Like if it's a month after, it's still good to have that record. Definitely as an officer, I look to those comments, especially if I'm on the fence about something or if I want a little bit more context. So even if it's late, I would definitely suggest putting it in there, at least to have that, you know, record of correspondence.
And just a tip, at least what I do to make sure that all meetings are documented, because I know like it's an administrative piece that sometimes gets forgotten. So I try to document right in the meeting with the student what we talked about, or literally right when the meeting is done, so that we don't forget. sometimes even my students forget to actually trigger and request that mentor review just because we've booked the meeting outside of PERT itself. So, you know, if all the administrative pieces are done in the meeting, then you'll make sure that none of them are forgotten.
Yeah, I usually tell after the meeting, I will tell my mentees that, you know, I will complete everything within a week, and I will send you an email or a text or a message just to let you know it is done, and check on PERT to make sure you can see it on your side as well. So that is something that I will do to make sure that the report is being completed on a timely basis.
Great. What is the appropriate time frame to check in with my mentee outside of the required annual meetings or biannual meetings? My apologies.
So anything beyond the 2 formal meetings is optional, but I definitely like to check in every few months just to see how things are going. It definitely helps keep the relationship going. It keeps the student engaged. He or she knows that you care about them.
I always tell them that, you know, if there's anything that you feel that is in discussion that is needed outside of our meeting time, I'm always available. Otherwise, I always check in with them, you know, maybe not every couple of months, and just see how things are going. But if there's something important that myself or my mentee felt is very important, need to be discussed, I always have the door open for a quick meeting or for a quick call to make sure that I'm available to support the mentees.
Mm-hmm. And while I'm no longer a mentor anymore, but when I was a mentor, our reviews and the whole process was kind of around the semi-annual performance reviews. So, you know, a month prior, I'm sending out a note just saying, hey, like, I know we're gonna, you know, be meeting to discuss, make sure that you have all of your reporting and stuff up to date in PERT. So definitely a good idea, because sometimes students do forget, it does get busy. So, you know, if it's triggered in your mind, you can send them a note to let them know, just to ensure that they're prepared when the time comes to have that discussion.
Those are some great points. Thank you. Another challenge mentors often face is when they're mentoring students who report to them. Here are some questions from our audience. So the first question we received was, what is the difference between my role as a supervisor or manager and my role as a mentor?
So maybe I'll jumpstart this one, because there is a difference between the experience verification route and the pre-approved program route. So if you are a mentor within the EVR route, as a supervisor, you're required to sign off on the factual accuracy of a student's experience report. So you'll probably get a note once they submit that report to be verified in the system. Again, you're not approving any technical competency areas. You're just more so saying, okay, the student did do what they listed in their report. Within a PPR, and Lauren, maybe you can talk a bit to the differences between the two.
Sure. So as a mentor in the PPR, if you are as well their manager, in the PPR program, you don't actually have to verify the competency development separately. So there's no sign off for that report. Just as the mentor, you are supporting them as they acquire the competencies of a CPA. So you would be signing off that you talked about it with the student and it appears to be reasonable.
So I'm gonna actually break this my answer into 2 parts. First, from a more technical reporting aspect, yes, you know, if you're in the EVR world, if you're the manager of your students / mentees, you do have to sign off on their experience for submission purposes to be valued so their experience will be evaluated against the technical competency by CPA Ontario. And as a mentor, you are required to submit and complete the mentor review report. So those from the technical aspect, you know, as a manager and also a mentor, those are the 2 reports you have to complete and submit for the EVR side. But I'm also going to address this question in a more holistic view. It's like what I think, you know, my understanding of a manager is. So if I put on the head of a manager, I'm more focusing with, you know, coaching and focusing more ensure, you know, the person that I'm managing, they have the capability to perform their assigned tasks up to the required standard. It's more technical, you know, business task focused and performance driven, right? But however, if I put on the head of a mentor, I'm focusing more on the mentee's overall career development. is focusing more on the interpersonal and soft skill, that the mentee should have regardless of the role that they're in. So these are what I call, maybe more of a transferable skill set that they can use regardless, what position they're in the future.
And I think just to definitely make sure that we clarify so that no one's confused, as a supervisor, you do have to sign off on the factual accuracy if a student is with an EVR. As a mentor, you're not required to sign off on the factual accuracy of an experience report. You're there to talk about a student's progression throughout their career, primarily focusing on, their development and the enabling competency review. The role is slightly different if you're a manager within, a pre-approved program, especially if you're the PM or PL. You're ensuring that students are getting work that's in line with the approved competency maps that you would have worked on. But again, you're not required to go into and sign off on each of their experience reports because, it's assumed that they're getting work, through your review within line with the pre-approved program.
Great points. Do I have to separate the roles, wear different hats when speaking to the student? And I think we kind of covered most of this already.
So to me, I mean, as long as you're completing the requirements, the roles itself just blend. The mentor part is almost like a continuation of the manager piece. And it would be a little bit confusing to me to try to really separate those.
Yeah, I agree. Like for me, I don't think it's necessary to separate the role. Like the key message is that, if you're doing a mentor review and, you focus on discussing item related to the enable competency during the mentor-mentees, and don't go off track and discuss maybe more something else that is more of a task or performance related items.
And I think, Justin, you already covered this, but do I have to do double the reporting for each student?
If you are in the EVR world, if you are both the manager and the mentor, then yes, there's 2 report you have to.
But it's not really, to me, double the reporting.
Yeah.
You're looking at the same report once, but you do have 2 sign-offs. So as the supervisor, you would be signing off on the accuracy. And as a mentor, you would be, documenting your mentor meeting. And in that sign-off, it says that you agree that it's reasonable.
Agree.
I do think it kind of helps to, if you do have the benefit, because it's not necessarily the case, as we saw from the previous scenario, it's not necessarily the case where you will be, the mentor for someone that is working for you. But I do think that there is some benefit when you are the mentor to a student who's reporting to you, because it helps to provide more color and context around their development and their progression, especially if, as you having your mentor hat on saying, okay, hey, if you need your core competencies in financial reporting and you don't quite have exposure yet to working on financial statement notes, what can we do to kind of help, get you there? And that's you having both a supervisor hat on or a manager hat on, and as well as a mentor to say, well, you need this competency to get your core. As a manager, I'm going to help allocate you this, this information. So not necessarily that it takes a lot longer on the reporting side, but, there is benefits to having those together.
Great point. I find it very challenging to be both a student supervisor's manager and mentor. What should I do?
So it's funny because Janelle's comment from the previous question sort of leads into this in my mind. So just to give a little bit of a different perspective, I actually find it quite helpful to be a student's manager and mentor. And I would just try to think about it a little bit more positively. And, you have the ability to really know the student well and build that strong relationship. And you'll know where they're excelling and where they might need further development, and you can really help guide them in the right direction.
So for me, like, if you're in that a situation where you find a challenge to wear both hats, I would say that if you cannot do both roles, I will ask the student to look for somebody else to be the mentor, because otherwise both of you will be in a challenging situation where you might not be able to do both roles well. This is what I would personally suggest.
Mm-hmm. Definitely both sides of the coin and both perspectives. Definitely benefits, as well as maybe not, but definitely, to take a look at it and see how, and I know we covered this a little bit later, sometimes some of the challenges are maybe on the relationship side in terms of how you interact with the student. So definitely to take a look at it holistically. As Lauren said, there's a lot of positives to playing the same hat, because you can help, to execute you know, a lot more of the development points and understand a lot of the challenges as well. But, you know, if you are having difficulties, you know, definitely discuss that with your student in terms of changing the roles.
Great, thank you all. Some of our mentors encounter an obstacle in the form of a student who feels there is no need for a mentor or are just frustrated with the need for practical experience requirements. Here are some questions from our participants. What can I do to make this a positive relationship while still achieving my objectives as a mentor?
So I do agree that many mentees at this stage still do not really recognize or appreciate how lucky they are that this program has been implemented and now they have a formalized mentorship program. It's still fairly new, so I think it will take a little bit more time for students to realize that it's not just an administrative exercise. And I mean, enabling competencies are really going to be the true indicator of career success. Pretty much anyone going through the CPA PEP program can learn the technical, but the ones who stand out are really going to be those who have the enabling skills. So they are so lucky to have an experienced CPA guiding them and, you know, helping them progress as they achieve their designation. So I would say just to try to have those meaningful conversations and really listen to them, ask them good questions, tell them about your experiences, and at some point the student is going to reflect and really realize the value add.
Yeah, and for me, personally, I wish this program was in place when I was going through the my accounting professional study, because from a mentorship program perspective, at least as a mentor, what I see is that it's just not an administrative task. I really wish I can do whatever I can to help the mentee succeed. And that's just not, you know, discussing about, say, CPA specific related topic, right? It can be a conversation about career really in general, you know, education, professional development, challenges that we might face in our professional life. You know, the important thing, at least for me personally, of having a good mentor is that they can tell you the mistake that they made before while in their career. So yourself, the mentee, can hope to avoid making the same mistakes again. And I believe your mentor is, you know, is genuine. They want to help you and they're open to discuss any business or professional topic that the mentee is interested in.
Yeah, that's so true. Like, this program is just the start of the relationship, and there's so much more that can be built upon.
Absolutely. Is it my responsibility to educate my mentee on the practical experience requirements?
So for me, I would say, no, you don't have to educate them. Like, they should, you know, as they go through the program, they should have an understanding of, you know, what is required from that perspective. But for a mentor, yes, I would sort of refer back what I said at the beginning. You know, you should have a general understanding, you know, of the requirements. So in case your mentee has some general question, you will have a high level answer for them. And, you know, once again, if there's anything specific that the mentee has, I don't know, I always ask them to refer back to CPA Ontario for guidance.
Yeah, like we said at the beginning of the webinar, there are so many great resources that they can look at. Again, like the fact sheets and the webinars that really go through everything that's required. And I'll again point out that the consolidated summary is really helpful at this stage, because when you launch that aspect in PERT, it will show you like exactly how much time they have left, if any time's been added out of the 30 months. So it's a really good tool for the mentee to understand where they're at and for the mentor to understand as well.
Great points. How do I draw the line between being supportive and understanding and not hand-holding the student?
So I do find this tough sometimes, just because I want all my students to succeed and sort of do everything the right way. But I remind myself that it's their designation and they need to do this on their own. I will send reminders just to help move the process along, so we're not like forgetting to meet or for them to do an experience report. But with regards to like responses in the experience reports at this part, I think it's really important not to handhold. So, you know, sometimes a student doesn't know what to write, or they're going to come to you and ask, you know, can you help me think of an example or expand on an idea? And this is where I really would hold back and make sure that I'm not feeding them the answers. Instead, this is when I would ask those probing questions and, ask them about different experiences or challenges or new files or projects they're working on, so that eventually they're able to come up with the answers themselves.
Yeah, I agree. I try not to spoon feed my mentees as much as possible. Like right from the beginning, I will make it clear that, before we start, this mentor-mentee relationship is like a partnership at work. Both of us have to work together. There are certain things that are my responsibility, and there are certain things that is your responsibility. Both of us have to do, our job and hold our end of the bargain in order for this, relationship to be successful. From a reporting requirement perspective, I will, if the time is coming up, I'll try to send a reminder to the mentee saying that, hey, this is almost 6 months, please remember to do your report. But, I'm not gonna go chase after the mentee, like say maybe as a manager, if you're chasing someone to do their work, like, hey, where's your report? I need to do it now. No, I won't do that. That's, it is, time management is a professional skill set that the mentee will eventually, will need, and all professional will need to be successful, right? And on the problem solving side, I try to encourage the mentees to, instead of giving them the answer, I try to ask them probing question, like what was mentioned before, right? How would, if you're in this situation, what would you do? What do you think is the course of action? And then give feedback to help to develop that mindset that will, help them to be successful.
Those are all great points. Thank you. What are some tips for handling a mentor-mentee relationship that's not working?
So I would definitely try to look at why it's not working, find the root cause. Is, the mentee or the mentor not prepared for the conversations? Is one party not fulfilling their responsibilities? Can you at least try to attempt to fix what's going on so that the relationship does work? I would definitely talk to the mentee and ask them how they feel it's going. If you think something's off, then chances are they probably feel the same way and will probably be relieved that you're bringing it up. And also, I think that it's okay that a relationship doesn't work. In my organization, we do have a formalized performance manager program, and we look at the relationships every year to see, does it make sense to switch people? And sometimes personalities just don't match. So I think it's okay to move on as well and have the mentee find a new mentor.
Yeah, my approach is very similar. I will have an open and candid conversation with my mentees, and just discuss the issue that we both of us are having, and see what's wrong with it, and then take a look. What are some of the course of action we can undertake to try to improve our working relationship? And if it fails after we give it a try, no hard feeling, sometimes it's just relationship just doesn't work out. I will ask the mentee, with permission, we can talk to CPA Ontario, or even, someone that you think can help you to develop a career and become your new mentor.
I do also want to add that if you are part of a pre-approved program, at this point, it would definitely be important to talk to your program manager or program leader about what's going on, and perhaps they have some insight or can designate a new mentor.
Great, thank you. A common issue we hear from our mentors is what is expected of them when their mentee is behind in their reporting. Here are some questions we received. So how often should I be meeting with my mentee? And I think we've talked quite extensively about this so far, but.
Yeah, and just to kind of reiterate, so there is a PER requirement that a student is required to have 2 mentor meetings documented in PER. So it doesn't count if it's in requested status, doesn't count if it's canceled, but to have it completed. And they're required to have at least semi-annually. And if they don't, then they're assessed a 1-month duration penalty. So to kind of keep that in your mind as you're meeting and discussing items with your mentee.
Great. Can I trigger their request for mentor review?
So the mentee has to trigger the request from the PERT system, but that again is just sort of the documentation piece. And you could always set up a meeting outside of PERT in Outlook if you wanted to take the first step.
Yeah, and on PERTs, the mentor can put in the next review date in the system, but you cannot trigger quote unquote a formal review request in the system.
Yeah, you don't necessarily have to be tied to the reporting tool in terms of when you have those meetings. You just have to make sure that you do document that the meeting happened within the tool.
Great. What are some of the differences in responsibilities for a mentor and a mentee?
And maybe you can start with this one. So we have highlighted some of them. So a mentee is required to request that mentor review in PERT. Sometimes if your mentee is having difficulties doing this, it could be because they need to have at least one report in verified status in order to request a mentor review. Otherwise, the system kicks out an error. And that's because, the whole premise is student is supposed to have that experience report documented and, you're discussing their progression throughout that piece of the reporting period. And then as a mentor, you're responsible for completing and documenting that review within PERT.
Yeah, so just to add a little bit onto that, from my view is that, in addition to what was discussed, the one of mentor primary responsibility is to provide guidance on the competency development for the mentees. So it will help to ensure the mentees is established, a right mindset on, ethics and professional value. From a mentee perspective, the primary responsibility for me is, they make sure they have a good understanding of the requirement on what needs to be done to complete both the technical and enabling competency development, develop the necessary skill set for certification. And, they have to track their own progress and make sure they submit their reports on time.
Another question we received is how will their being late in reporting in PERT affect the student's ability to complete their practical experience requirements? Is there anything I can do to assist the student?
So Janelle did mention before that for every mentor meeting that is missed, a month will be added to their practical experience, which is quite a long time. So I know for my students, at least, once this happens, it's sort of like a warning and it wakes them up in a way that, oh, wow, this really does happen. So I would just encourage them to get caught up to date, have them do that catch up experience report, have a mentor meeting, make sure that it's documented so they're not going to lose any more of their time.
And I think another thing to add on to, outside of the fact that it's adding on a month to an already 30-month requirement in order to achieve, to achieve the PE side of getting a designation, they're also losing out on important feedback too. So the feedback in terms of their progression, if a student, is at the 20-month mark and they've never had a mentor review and then find out that, they haven't checked in with us, so they're not getting the feedback from us, but they also haven't checked in with you, and their role is very limited in terms of what they can achieve, and they're not very far on their enabling, that's going to hurt them, outside of the fact that we're giving them penalties, that's going to hurt them even more at the end, because it is going to take more time for them to show the progression. So it's more than just the duration penalty, they're missing out on that, a really key point of contact in terms of getting that feedback and that mentorship from you guys.
I would also add that I do have some students as part of my pre-approved program that actually did meet with their mentor, but they were just missing that documentation piece. So I would still have the mentor record the meeting that took place and what was discussed, just so CPA knows that, you met and they know that they're progressing. So they likely will still have the penalty just because it wasn't documented on time, but at least the background information is in the system.
We received a question from our audience that I think is very important to address. So I have a mentee that I think I need to let go. How do I handle that?
Okay.
Yeah.
So if the relationship is no longer working, and then the student feels that there's a change for a mentor. So I think as a mentor, what they should do is there's a couple of points. Number one, ensure all previous meeting that took place is recorded in the system on PERT. And the old mentor should do a final review if possible with your mentees and submit one last mentor review before closing the relationship, so the whole thing sort of complete. And this way, it also ensure the next mentor who is picking up the mentees will know exactly where things are left off.
Agreed. And to kind of elaborate on a point, so definitely a way to close a relationship, but even just for, your own mentorship skills and your own enabling skills, there's always a reason. Sometimes it's personalities don't match, and definitely have that conversation. I think, as you were saying earlier, Lauren, like have that conversation with your mentee to see, potentially what the issue is or what's not working, to see if, there is a potential fix it. Maybe it's a mismatch in communication styles. Maybe it's, mismatch in expectations. Maybe the mentee is getting frustrated at the process because they don't understand what's required. So sometimes some of these fixes, it's at least important to try those first, before ending the relationship. But if personalities don't match, that's definitely understandable as well. And those are some great action points to make sure you wrap up the relationship appropriately.
Mm-hmm. And you are able to action that in PERT, but as Justin said, it is advisable that you wrap up the relationship and have a mentor review and make sure to finish that relationship, because what ends up happening is a new mentor might not be versed in what it is that the mentee would have done, and so are not able to give that mentor review for the time frame that they have completed, and we then end up having to follow up with you in order to try to get that information and complete that report for the mentee. Another question we got was, my mentee and I agreed that they are ready for completion. How do we correct the reporting issue?
So I would ensure that your mentee has all experience documented in an experience report, and make sure everything is there, then that they really are ready for completion. So are their technical skills at the target proficiency? Are their enabling skills all at a level 2? And even if they write that they're at a level 2, do their responses really meet the requireds in the rubric? And at this point, I would really suggest looking at the consolidated summary together to double check that all requirements are met and ensure that your mentor meetings are documented. And then once all these things are done, then the student can go ahead and request a profession assessment. And then the rest will be up to CPA Ontario to determine if they're ready. And at that point, any additional penalties will be added for reporting requirements that were missed.
Okay, my role has changed and I'm no longer the student's mentor. Do I have any responsibilities before I end our relationship? And I think we really
covered that.
Yes, I think we really covered that in that last question. So as we said, it's the same thing as if the relationship is not working, you need to finish the relationship, have the mentor review. Okay. Thank you, panelists. We did receive one additional question in terms of when it is that mentors should be having the meetings with the mentees. So the question was, do reviews have to be every 6 months, or can it be 2 reviews at any time within the 12-month period?
So the requirement in the PERT says that it must be semi-annually. So it doesn't have to be on the dot every 6 months. But when we look at, in terms of having timely reviews and how a student is completing their experience reports, and again, that requirement is not there for them to complete it every 6 months, but in terms of having a timely review, if a student does a 6-month experience report, the objective of that mentor review is to talk about their progression during that period. So happening at the 6-month mark or shortly thereafter the 6-month mark is essentially what makes sense to provide the most timely feedback. It's not required, but definitely, a good practice to get into the habit of.
Yeah, and I think there might be a misconception amongst the students that it does have to be exactly on that 6-month mark, because I have had students come to me and say, oh my gosh, July 2nd, we need to meet, yeah. It's due, I'm going to be penalized. And I'm like, no. They do have to be semi-annually. It's around the 6-month mark. So within the month or so is fine. And I mean, you also just have to think about what makes sense. So you need 2 meetings in the year. Obviously, having 2 meetings in December does not make sense to discuss progression for an entire year.
Yeah, I agree. Yes, pretty much the same for the EVR route. So just make sure it's around the 6-month period, and it will be okay.
Okay, great. Okay, so what we have done is we have some of the feedback that we were getting at the onset when we've asked you to send in your questions was that you were looking to see some examples of what some of the student self-reporting should look like and what of the mentor reports could potentially look like. So here's an example of what a professional and ethical behavior self-assessment answer could potentially look like. In this one, we'll give you a few minutes to read it over and take a look. This is an example of a level 2 in terms of enabling competencies for professional and ethical behavior. If we can go to the next slide. So the next slide will describe basically the impact, and if confronted with a similar situation, what would they do? Okay. And the next one is an example of a mentor review comments. So this is an example of somebody reviewing a student's progress and some of the components that they have broken it down to. The mentor review has meeting outcomes, has future goals, has follow-ups, talks about competencies and development, and covers off some of these components. You know, it also talks about the fact that they have had multiple meetings. They met twice within the time period, within the 6-month period. So it's documenting a wholesome relationship between a student and a mentor. So I'm going to ask the panelists, what do you think of this example? Do you think that this is a good mentor review? Do you think that you would add something more to it?
So I'm actually going to jump back a bit and just kind of comment on the professional and ethical behavior item, just because I find that this is an area that a lot of students struggle with, because they often say, you know, I'm working for an ethical company, there's no fraud at the company, and the intention is not to promote or suggest that any of the companies that the students are working for are unethical. And, you know, while not all of those examples have to be extreme, you know, it's definitely important to highlight, and this is where kind of the mentorship role comes in, is that there are going to be examples when students might be faced with, you know, a decision that might question their ethics. So for example, eating their time on an engagement, or, you know, being offered a gift or a job from the client, or, you know, being asked to delete information or not include something in the file. So again, while these are not extreme examples of, oh, a company committed fraud, it makes you question. A lot of time companies do have code of ethics to consider some of these situations, but it's just that initial thought process to say, oh, hey, you know, this is why, you know, I'm responding in this way to, you know, this issue. So I don't know if you guys have anything to add from your role. I do find that this is an area that a lot of students do struggle with.
100% without fail. Every one of my students comes to me with this, and they're like, I have not encountered an ethical issue. And I say, yes, you have. It's just not going to be this grandiose thing that you're thinking of. It's small little things, exactly like the examples you've said. Even like, you know, you're finding an entry on an audit that you need to book and the client's going to be upset. Like it could be any interaction that you might have a disagreement with somebody, and you're thinking about what your action's going to be.
The implications, exactly.
Yeah, similar situation in the experience that I have dealt with. You know, it's not someone grand big thing that that you might be dealing with, but it's sometimes a lot of the small everyday thing. You know, for example, you know, they ask you to book a journal entry. Oh, there's no backup. Oh, don't worry, he's coming. We'll give it to you later. You know, well, but
could be a timing issue.
Yeah, it could be a timing issue. But you know, those are the things that, you know, the mentees might be dealing with, right? So it's like what I would say is usually it's not the big it's not really, sometimes it's not the big thing that you
Mhm.
keep on, but it's a lot of the small things, like everyday things.
Yeah, and this is, I think, exactly like what, this example that we've kind of given to you guys here is highlighting, there's a missing entry, you're trying to meet your timeline, you're trying to meet your deadlines. So definitely important things to consider. And just be mindful that this might be an area that, a lot of students sometimes save until the end, but if you could start having those conversations earlier so that they can start thinking about it, definitely beneficial to them.
Great, thank you.
I guess on the mentor review comments, I don't know if you guys had anything off the bat.
I thought it was just great how they broke it down. Like there was a lot of information there, which I liked from some of the mentor comments that I've seen. Sometimes it's just like 1 or 2 lines. So I thought that it was great that they were breaking it down like this.
Mm-hmm. I think from a reviewer perspective, in terms of some of the things that I look for, so I definitely I love how they broke it down. I love how they indicated, when the meeting was, what the outcome was. They talked about future goals. I would even say, in a sense, to get a little bit more specific on key areas if you can. So, if, for example, a student achieved, and again, as a mentor, you're not signing off on the factual accuracy or approving a role, but you say, hey, my mentor did have exposure to a business acquisition within the period. This is why they have, that proficiency in finance 3, for example, in terms of the valuation that they did for that role. And that's even important to highlight so that when I'm looking at it, I'm like, oh, okay, high level, bigger picture, I'm looking at that role and I'm like, okay, that makes sense because they've had exposure. And sometimes I find mentors even highlight the complexity of something better than a student can, or, this was a company, this was an acquisition of 2 companies, and this is what the student had to consider. And it might not necessarily be at their level, they're performing work above their level. So all of those types of insights do help to provide, a good picture in terms of when, if we're on the fence about something, and kind of need that extra affirmation.
Yeah, and I do agree because when I read it, I was wondering, okay, they talk about their technical and enabling competencies, but which ones in particular? So I was looking to see, which ones are they working on, even more so with the focus on the enabling for the, within the next 6 months, and what are they focusing on and targeting towards?
Yeah, like just to build it on, like all the essential element of a good review is there. Like for me, I would just add to specifically on action item on like what, just to say that what is specifically being worked on, for the outcome for the period. So I think that will provide a little bit more clarity in addition on what is already there.
And you don't have to comment on everyone. Again, like this isn't supposed to be an essay for the mentor. So don't look at this and be like, oh my gosh, I have so much more to do than what, again, it doesn't have to be, a large exercise, but, definitely to highlight some of the most important things within there that you think, are important to a student moving forward, like a key challenge, a key highlight that they had that, might be above, their level or the level of other students is helpful.
That's great. Thank you, panel. Doesn't look like we have, do we have any more questions? We're just going to confirm.
Yes, we actually just got a very good one. We hired a CPA student a number of months ago who had 1 year left in their experience requirement. As their manager, they have recently asked me to be their mentor. Are there any considerations for taking over a mentoring relationship from a previous mentor?
So I have this happen all the time. People come in with, limited experience left to get, so they only need, a year or even less. And, obviously I'm part of a pre-approved program, so we take them on. But even, through an EVR route, you would definitely want to sort of understand where the mentee is at. So, talk to them about their previous experience and also look at that consolidated summary, because at this point, they would have had a profession assessment if they are changing a job. So it's really important to see, well, they self-assess themselves perhaps at a 2, but when we look at the consolidated summary, CPA Ontario says, well, no, this doesn't make sense. It's really at a 1. And you can see all of that in the consolidated summary. So at that point, I'd be looking at, okay, what's the expected timeline? Where do you need more experience? And where can we go from here to really just get to know the student because they are starting out sort of halfway through their term versus at the beginning.
Definitely. And I think an important thing to highlight as well is that when we do review a student's change of job, we do provide them with, areas to focus on. And we do give comments within the technical competency areas to say, hey, you're not at a level 2 yet, but this is what you do need for a level 2, or, to kind of refocus a student to say, okay, well, your core is met, but you still need 2 level 2s for your breadth, for example. So definitely taking a look at those profession assessment comments, because you do have access to those as a reviewer, and you can double check the previous comments as well. Definitely a good starting point to say, okay, from this point onward, this is the goals and objectives we're going to set to help you get there. And maybe it might not be exactly at 30 months, but how can we, get you close to that point?
I'll always reference back to the previous report if I'm taking over the relationship to see where things are, what needs to be worked on and so on. So yeah, definitely a similar approach.
That's great. Thank you, panelists. So some additional resources for our mentors. A lot of these handouts are attached on the handout panel for you, so you can take a look. The resources are available on our website, on CPA Canada's website. There are some guides and general ideas of what your responsibilities are, some Q&As and walkthroughs, as well as the CPA Way model, which is what the students are applying or are taught to apply to problem solving in terms of their work. If you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to contact us at any of the emails on your screen. Thank you very much, panelists. It's been a great discussion. We really appreciate your time, and thank you all for attending today's webinar. To continue the discussion, please don't hesitate to contact us on the LinkedIn group. On your screen right now, it is the second LinkedIn address, and we will be happy to continue the discussion on there. All of our mentor champions are on the LinkedIn group, as well as many other mentors who I'm sure would be happy to contribute and discuss all of these components and any other challenge you may have further. Thank you all.